Hello and welcome to the Humblebrag podcast. I'm your host, Nate Mendel, and I am joined today by my friend Hershy Dancziger. Thank you for joining. It's been a while, so I'm going to take a minute to give a couple updates, talk about where we're holding, where we're going, and then we'll get into a light conversation just to get things up and running, as they say, get the juices flowing. For a future, more in-depth conversation. So the past year has been pretty crazy, not just for, myself, but for the world with COVID and all of what's been going on and travel and me moving to Israel and all of that stuff. Absolutely retarded. I actually did an episode about the Miron. The last episode I did was about the Miron tragedy, kind of pushed that in there, but with all of what's been going on, there's no excuse. The bottom line is we stopped recording, right? We fell off the bandwagon. But we're back, so motivated, so pumped. And I think if we get into this, there's a future here. The future for Humblebrag could go in various directions, but I have in mind to turn it into just an interesting media company in general, not just podcasting, but potentially also creating great content on YouTube, videos, documentaries, educational videos. As you know, we had our Oman trip, and it was part of the documentary that I was creating that we're working on now. So just a lot of good, fun content coming our way. And if it materializes well, I think we could create an interesting niche. I have the idea of potentially having multiple contributors, co-hosts, and kind of just being a less of a structural business, but more of like a collaborative media company where anyone who's genuinely interested in putting in the time and being creative and sharing kind of hop on board, especially in our early stages, and get involved. Recently, my former co-host, my brother Ari, reached out to me and said that he was requesting if I could remove the episodes that he had done, and that he wants to live a more private life. He's not interested in recording. He's not interested in sharing his life with anyone, so on and so forth. Now, interesting, right?
Interesting, yes.
Now,
very interesting.
Now, if he wasn't my brother, obviously I would say no. I mean, I can't just take a third of all Humblebrag episodes and take them offline because you have a change of heart, but we do things for friends and family that we wouldn't otherwise do. When we were in Oman the other week, somebody walked up to us, right, and said, he was talking about a specific episode that Ari had recorded with someone, and how it really like he liked it. He really connected to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I know that there are people out there who have listened to the episodes and enjoyed them, and they might be wondering where some of those episodes are, because if you go through the archives now, you'll see that a lot of episode numbers are skipped. So I just wanted to put that out there so there's an understanding. Which kind of segues us into an interesting conversation that I wanted to just touch on today. The concept, that notion of growing, right? How do you approach this notion of growing and facing new truths about us, our desires, and our life, and then dealing with those truths, even if they mean reverting on previous endeavors and people? Isn't that an interesting notion just to think about? And that's what it makes me think about. I'm like, sorry, Ari, on your expense, we're going to have a great conversation, but it is an interesting conversation, right?
I see where you're going with this. I see when you said he started with this story, I had a feeling, ooh, he's gonna ride on that. So like I was quiet, see where you're gonna go with this. But here we go. So we can discuss it.
Yeah,
Look, we don't
no,
have to discuss his private life. Like he says, he wants to keep his life private. But we can discuss things around it. We can discuss things that led to that, or just a conversation like you just said.
yeah, not even him at
What it
all.
brings us
It
to.
just, to me, everything's a learning experience and a conversation. So that phenomenon in its own right, I thought to myself, that's actually pretty interesting, pretty commendable for reasons that I think, which I will explain, but not having anything to do with him specifically, just the topic in its own right. So one of the things that I was thinking was that we often hold ourselves accountable to, like the psychological phenomenon of shoulds, I should, right? The right thing to do, or I should, for example, in this scenario, it may be like, I should not request from my
Should be
brother
doing something.
not to remove the episodes because I committed or I said that I would be part of it, or I shouldn't do it because it'll hurt him, right? So we live a lot. With a lot of shoulds, and we hold ourselves accountable to these shoulds. And psychologically, it's a real phenomenon, and we're taught to try to switch those into desires, expressions of desires. Instead of saying I should or should not do X, Y, Z, you want to switch it into the opposite. And that's what you essentially see happened here. And I think it's an amazing lesson. Instead of my brother saying to himself, I should or I shouldn't, and trying to hold himself accountable to it, he went and said what he actually felt, which was that I want to have a private life. I don't want my stories being out there anymore. Can you take the episodes down? Now, regardless of how hard that may have been to say, and regardless of what it does to us, and we choose to do, to concede his wishes, he still did essentially the right thing and didn't torture himself with shoulds. So it's a really interesting concept in its own right.
So you mean by should, you mean if he should remove them and ask you to remove it, or if should is if you should try to fight with it and say I don't want to, or try to question, or try to argue with him on that.
No, so let me back up. The phenomenon of shoulds is a psychological phenomenon that human behavior, that is in human behavior, right? Especially like us growing up religious, we grow up in a framework of shoulds and shouldn'ts. You should wash your hands in the morning. You should daven on time.
Everything is should. Everything is should.
Everything is shoulds and shouldn'ts. And that's the framework.
Look at that's religion. Religion is you should do this, you shouldn't do that. That's what religion is.
I would venture to say that everyone kind of has that on a certain level, but in religious life, it's like it's blown up.
Because think about, if we're going to talk about Jews, when we're talking about the Torah, it just says we should be keeping Shabbos. We should be eating kosher. We shouldn't eat this. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't hurt a friend. So it comes from that. It comes from, especially to people that are Jewish. I don't know if someone that's not Jewish, where does that come from? I think society has the should and shouldn't. Yeah. Every human being has the shoulds and shouldn't do. Now, where it causes a problem is when we only live by that. And your life is, should I do this? I should do this. I shouldn't do this. And we do things because we have to. We should be doing that. And it's not always the case. When it comes to religion, we can say, yeah, well, I'm Jewish. And as a Jew, I should be keeping Shabbos, right? That's when you say, that's when I use the word should. But there's a lot of times where we use the word should, and it just creates pressure in our life. It creates anxiety, and it creates a feeling that we don't need necessarily.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the opposite of growth. It doesn't produce or promote growth. And that's why I was
Right.
calling it a behavioral phenomenon. It's something that humans do. Now, if you grew up religious, you'll have it on an extreme level.
On every
But
occasion.
even if you didn't grow up religious, you're gonna experience this. So now, if you take that phenomenon and you roll it into this occurrence, I'm really proud of what he did, because somebody in his position could be thinking, I should not, for example, request to remove the episodes.
Why shouldn't he?
Why he would tell himself that potentially? Why somebody in
Yes,
that position would?
let's
Because why would a podcast owner want to remove a third of their episodes from their show? It may hurt or annoy or anger the person that you're requesting it from. Or he might say, I should stick to this venture because I committed to it, and I said I was involved with it, and I said I wanted to share and be expressive, right? So naturally we live in these shoulds and shouldn'ts. As we get healthier and grow and we step out of them, we go out of our comfort zone and we actually express what we feel. And that's what he did. Now, whether I would have done it or not is irrelevant. The fact that he did it is really cool, and hence this conversation.
And I commend him for that. Because he obviously got to this point where he wanted it. He has to do this. He feels like he has to do this. Now he understands probably the what it will do to him, to his brother, right? Your brother, you have a business off this, you have a life off this, you do, you have content, and he obviously was at the point where he had to do this. Should or shouldn't?
It's just an amazing life lesson. It's like it's essentially saying, don't live your life in accordance or influenced by your shoulds and shouldn'ts. Learn how to express your needs and your desires and your aspirations, and grow in that capacity. Now let's go a step further. Even the notion of growing from how many of us live, I guess you could say, in the shadows of what we told ourselves we want to be and do when we were younger. So 5 years ago, I was into the podcast and I was into podcasting and sharing. Today, I'm not. Do I hold myself to those standards because I'm going to be stubborn, I'm going to pull through, I said I want it, I love it? Or will I be honest with myself and say, no, I lost heart. That's not who I am anymore. And I'm going to move past that. So if you go to that even deeper level of tuning in to who we are today versus what we told ourselves we're going to be, or who we were 5 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, very interesting to unpack that as well. Because when we grow from our 20s to our 40s, so much changes. How many stories do we tell ourselves today we think we're going to be in 2 years? 2 years might come around, bro. Ain't happening. I'm not interested in it. I don't want it.
I mean, I think you did the right thing. I think whatever he wanted to do is his decision. You did what you felt is right, not what you should or shouldn't do. You did what you felt was the right thing to do, and you did it. Is it the right thing?
Let me pull you out of that. Forget about that scenario. I'm not even talking about him. The idea of humans feeling. Imagine me and you. We talk about what our aspirations are today, and if 2 years from now you're still have those aspirations, and I'm not feeling it, right? Do I hold myself to those standards? Do I continue to tell myself? Do I continue to pursue it and live that life, or run after the same goals because that was my goal 2 years ago? Or have I grown?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think when we're younger, you can see it. When we're younger, when you're a kid, you have goals, you have dreams, right? I want to be the president. I want to be in the army. When you grow up, that changes. That doesn't mean that your goal when you were a kid doesn't mean that that was your dream, that was your real goal. That was your goal then based on what you knew then. But goals change, and there's nothing wrong with goals changing, right? He had a goal, you have a goal, and then 2 years later, you're like, you know what? I want something else, and that's fine. As long you have a goal. If you go with the goal, you work with the goal, that's your life. That's what you're aiming for, you know? But dreams and these things change all the time.
Yeah. So again, this is just, when I look at this, it's just another lesson that could be learned from it.
No, what's the
Go
lesson?
with the changes, express those changes, be those changes. Don't hold yourself accountable to stuff that you promised yourself 3 years ago.
Right. The change is what you need. The change is what we need to grow. I mean, we learn so much from the things that we wanted a year ago, and then you're looking and you're like, at times you'll look back and be like, see, a year ago I wanted to do this, and now my goals are completely not there. It's like completely somewhere else. And at times you can put yourself down for it and say, see, look at me. I have goals and then it goes nowhere. And then I want something else and I'm inconsistent, and it can bring you down. It can put you down and say, this is the type of person you are. But I say it's just the opposite. I say that's growth. Figuring out what you want, setting a goal, and then it changes. But stick to a plan, stick to a goal. And if that changes, that is part of the the experience. That is part of the growth.
Yeah,
Find your way.
There's an added level.
Saying?
Yeah, there's an added level of complexity to that when you add in the factor of partners or spouses. So think about the same phenomenon, but when you're in a business or when you have a spouse of any sorts, any partner, and you grow together and you make goals together, and you have one partner who is still stuck on a specific goal, a specific achievement, a specific lifestyle, and you've grown, it becomes much more difficult to relate, right? To abandon, betray, right? How can I go tell my spouse that I'm no longer interested in something that I potentially convinced her or him to get into in the first place?
Potentially, the relationship was built on something I'm not interested in anymore.
Right.
What do you do?
Right.
What do you do?
Now you're feeling me. Now we're talking the same language.
Exactly. So
this is an interesting phenomenon.
Is that right? But is that a problem necessarily? Is that wrong? Are you in a bad place? I don't think so. I think these things will happen. If the commitment is still there, if you're we're talking about partners right now, right? Business partner, or let's talk about a spouse, because business partner, there's a goal, and
business has
you don't meet the goals,
more layers
different,
to it,
right.
But interpersonal relationships.
Interpersonal relationships, like let's talk about a girlfriend, a wife, a spouse. Things will change. Things will always change. I think the commitment of being with a spouse, being with another person, the commitment of being together and working through whatever that is, a change of goal is part of it. It's part of the working through it. Right?
Do you believe in like raw, unfiltered communication, uncompromising communication to the point of potentially harming the relationship? For example, you go into a relationship and you and your girlfriend have these conversations where you agree that you're going to work towards having a kosher home. Okay, you're not so religious, you're trying to be religious, whatever it is, right? Now you get married and you're both working towards it. 2 years in, you've gotten pretty good. You no longer put the milchig knife in the fleishig sink and the fleishig knife in the milchig sink, right? All that. But you're not feeling it. And you don't give a shit about those aspirations. So you don't care about those aspirations.
Anymore. So this is a difficult conversation. Not conversation, but I'm saying the question you just asked is not as simple as, yeah, well, do it and have the conversation. I think that goes in a lot in the conversation of values. What are your values, right? What is the values of this relationship, of this marriage, right? If this was a Jewish-based marriage, which we got married with the Jewish law based on this is what we're going to be, and now if you stop doing the Jewish law, you stop doing Jewish things, or you don't, basically, like you said, kosher stuff and Shabbos, sometimes it'll affect the relationship, right? Because the wife says, I'm sorry, this is something I can't stand for. I can't compromise. It's the religion that made us. It's the religion that we went into this marriage. That was the number one thing that, that made us, that this was going to be. So I think it comes back to values. If religion is your values,
right? But we're talking specifically here when those values change, and they could change, especially for a religious person. So, what do you do in the case that it changes? I don't know if there's an answer. If your values change, you valued living in a kosher home, kashrut-wise,
and now you don't. Now, first of all, if both of you stopped valuing religion or this,
then it's not a conversation, obviously.
Then it's not a problem. It's only a problem when one of the spouses, one of the partners do that.
Not so simple, eh? This example is just an example of how something like this and what we've been talking about could play out in a million different ways, where you have prior arrangements, agreements, and all kinds of frameworks of goals and aspirations that you built your past and your conception around. And as you get older, they change. They naturally do. How do you deal with that? So it's a very interesting thing to explore.
So let's go back to so this is how you started. You started with, if I could have these conversations, right? To have this open, raw conversations, uncomfortable conversations about things like that, where one of the partners stops keeping Shabbos or stops doing kosher, and now it starts affecting the relationship, where you have to have that conversation. So your question was, can I have these conversations? My answer is absolutely not. No one can. Now, will I if I have to? Probably. But it's not a comfortable conversation to have. It's not something we want to have, conversations we want to have. These are conversations that people run from every day. These are conversations that people do drugs because of. This will drive you crazy.
Yep.
You understand?
Yeah.
Like, this is the worst conversation to have, because you could also have a good relationship going. You can have everything going for you. Perfect wife, things are going well, but then there's something that you value and then she stops doing that. And you must have that conversation, and that conversation might affect everything good you have. So what do? You don't have the conversation. You eat yourself up. You overthink it. You start hating, despising the other person, and then the end result of that, right? And the result of that is not good.
Yeah,
It's horrible.
It could go a
It's
number of
horrible.
ways. Personally, I feel like I'm surrounded by friends and family that are very open to having intellectual
Conversations.
without bias. So, and that's what works for me personally. But I do understand and appreciate how difficult it is for some. And it's not simple. You have to use a lot of discretion when to open your mouth, when not to open your mouth. And
Oh my goodness! I mean,
not everyone could handle the truth.
that is the number.
A lot
Yeah,
of truth.
I mean,
A lot of truth leads to divorce, leads to breakup, leads to the ending of partnerships and friendships. Sometimes to preserve friendship and relationship, you're not going to share the truth.
no.
So I don't think there's a blanket
The
answer.
truth hurts.
I don't believe
The
in
truth
like.
hurts sometimes.
If we go back to my original question, do you believe in like unadulterated truth, expression, honesty? The answer is no. I don't believe in a blanket statement like that. You have to use discretion.
Why not?
You have to use discretion. It depends on the relationship type, your personality. It's like that concept I always quote. Rev Laser used to always say, "When it's from Shalmar, win the fight, lose the marriage." But it's a very powerful concept, right? And it's even older. Win the battle, lose the war. But win the fight, lose the marriage, could hit home a little bit, is more meaningful to everyday people. You could win every argument. You could outwit your partner. You could get into debates where you're smarter, more intelligent, and you have all the answers, and you lose your marriage as a consequence. And that's a serious lesson. It shows that it's so much more than just blanket statements and frameworks of thinking. Not everything works for everyone. You might be right, but you're going to lose your marriage if you put your foot down and you continue to be right and only right.
But I want to tell you something. There's nothing like following your beliefs. What makes humans, what makes us is our beliefs. For Jewish people, for us, it's believes in God. So for some people, if they stop believing in God, there is no them. Okay? So if your beliefs, your values are something, and then you live with someone that stopped valuing the same thing, and then you can't see it any other way, for you, that is your beliefs. That's everything. You have to have that conversation, and your marriage might end. Your life, I wouldn't say your life might end. It's just the opposite. Because if you stick to your beliefs and your values, maybe your marriage might end, but the beliefs and your values that makes you, that makes you who you are, is going to make you a better person. Is going to follow you into the next journey of yours. You understand what I'm saying? So maybe, right, there's kids involved and there's this involved, and by having this conversation, the results might not be good, right? The marriage might end and all that. But the fact that you stuck with your beliefs and you had the conversation based on that because it affected what you believe and your values, I think you're only coming out a winner. You're only coming out a winner.
Potentially.
It's hard to see, but it's just, and you're going to start another journey with another person, in another life, in another place, but you're going to get back to that. This belief, this value is your foundation, is who you are at that moment. Now, that can change, but at that moment, if that means everything to you, you must have the conversation. You must have the conversation.
Yeah, that's
unless you're starting to,
that's
wither a little bit.
That's a very common mode of thinking, philosophy, if you will. I wouldn't say that I personally agree or disagree. I think there are more layers to the cake. And one of the layers that that resonates more with me as I've evolved from the mode of thinking that you just described is relationships and meaning, right? What breeds relationships and meaning in life? Not necessarily following truth and vehemently promoting and forcing truth down the throats of those closest to you. Because, like I explained, the concept of win the fight, lose the marriage is a very important concept that has deep, significant consequences in our life. If you follow truth, as you described yourself, very often it could lead to a disastrous life. So you think the right thing to do is to follow the truth. It might lead to a new relationship, but it might lead to another 10 relationships that don't work out. And it may lead to all kinds of heartache.
But I don't think so, though. I don't think if you really followed the truth and you stuck up for your beliefs and your values, I don't think, now, maybe you're going to find yourself in tons of other relationships, but I don't think that's because of your beliefs. I think that's because of other issues, other shit, you know? By sticking to by following the truth, your truth, I think that's going to make you live a better life.
Yeah. I could certainly agree with, I could certainly agree with basically all that you said. I still think, though, that there's perhaps another layer to take into consideration that is just more on the compassion level, just more on a certain type of practical level where I guess you could say mathematical, what's going to bring more meaning to my life. For some people in certain relationships, especially in the religious world, the consequences of following truth and getting divorced is disastrous for the rest of their life. And if you look at the alternative, if they would stay together with their spouse, which many of them do, and they're criticized for, they factually and very, very often have a better life. I guess if you want to gauge goodness of life in terms of like how much headaches they have and how much complication and heartache and sadness and loneliness and all that kind of stuff, because there is a lot of potential issues that they could go through if they go through that divorce. And we're using these as models, as examples, but these are blanket concepts. There are times when staying in such a relationship may garnish less headache in your life and a more stable life. I'm not promoting one way or the other. I'm just saying that there's another layer of equation to take into account when we consider these phenomenon, and it's not just the pursuit of truth. Sometimes the pursuit of happiness, it contradicts the pursuit of truth, because for a lot of people, truth goes hand in hand with things that doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. Very deep concepts.
This is why I think that we were using the example of religion, but there could be so many other examples of when there's an argument, or not an argument, but when there's disagreement or values change. It's not to say this is your values, this is my values, if you can't understand or if you can't value the same things, I'm out. I feel like it has to be a discussion of what it is specifically, what the values are. Like, right. For example, if I value family, I value kids, and the spouse values kids as well. 2 years in, and then she says, I stopped valuing kids. I don't want kids. I don't believe in kids. I don't want that. What do? This is the one of the values in your life is family.
Yeah.
So you say...
Well, it's specifically in that I said that I think it has to be evaluated case by case, because it's not black and white.
Exactly. Exactly. That's you're right. You're right.
Now, if you were to ask me personally, when it comes to something that big, I would say that humans, for the most part, should have or do have some values that are make or break it values. For example, somebody like me or yourself, maybe you might say one of the values is family, to the point of at least having one child, right? And that might be a make or break it value for you. So if you end up in a relationship with someone who changed their mind, you might say, I'm sorry, we have to part ways because I cannot compromise on that.
And I want to tell you something else. Even if the conversation, you're not going to have this conversation, right? And you're going to be like, oh, she's probably saying that right now. Or maybe I'll change my mind. Eventually, this is going to either become a problem or you're going to stop believing in kids. So that's something that says, you go back to what I valued and how values can change. So if my value changed, which is kids changed, right? Then the relationship works out and everything is fine. But what's going to happen is if you are going to push it off and not have the conversation and try to figure it out, eventually it's going to come to an end. It's just going to come to an end. It's either you're going to lose the value, which means no kids, or the relationship is going to come to an end and you're going to go and find kids somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree. It'll backfire. It'll have negative repercussions.
It'll backfire. It'll absolutely backfire.
Yeah. It's not sustainable like that. All right. Well, that is a great conversation. I think a great starter.
I'm saying says the guy that hasn't not been married yet, not had kids, all that, but come to me, give you great advice on marriage.
You know what they
Why
say?
not, you know?
There's like the stereotypical joke about like the marriage counselor is like a single 40-year-old, like
single 40-year-old, never been married.
Right.
Been
because
with all women, has relationship issues, but he'll teach you just what it is. It's just how it works.
Yeah, well, I don't have an issue with that because academics, thinkers are not necessarily people with experience. They teach principle concepts, and the people
it helps a lot.
The people experiencing it have to put into play the concepts.
Exactly. And experience is not always great. The experience could be shitty also. So like maybe don't even tell people about your experience. It's not good. It's not great. The results are not good. So maybe just, the thinkers.
So tribute to Ari and his phenomenal episodes that he had, and for inspiring this beautiful conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ari.
For everyone who heard his episodes and enjoyed them, you got lucky because they're gone forever. And these are the types of fun, interactive conversations we're going to be having and that we're looking forward to. So there's a lot to come ahead.
This is going to be great. This is going to be fun. I'm excited. I'm definitely looking forward. And then sometimes it's going to be this conversation. Sometimes we'll just talk out of our ass. Stick with us. You know what I'm saying? Just stick with us and be patient. We'll get you there. But just it's not always, it's just going to be this and that, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting.
As one of the workers in Newark in the warehouse used to say, and he was a pretty crappy worker. He would say, just remember, with my help, you could be the best. The I and the Caesar. You remember Caesar, the driver?
Oh my, yeah. He worked with his father. Yeah.
Just remember, with my help, you could be the best.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be all right.
Thank you. Until next time, peace and love.